As someone who spends a lot of time talking about leaks and rumors about phones, I think that there is quite a bit of maybe misunderstanding about how all of this works. There are times where we have leaks about a phone and then subsequent leaks that are different from those first set of leaks. And sometimes this goes on for years and then the eventual device comes out and it bears very little resemblance to those original leaks. And people think, oh, of course, that means those original reports were just wrong. And that can be the case, but it's not always the case. Today, we're talking about the Pixel Fold, and I think that this is a phenomenal example of how that sort of thing can happen, and the reporting can be pretty accurate all the way through, even though the final device is pretty different, and it can potentially take years and years of rumors before the final device actually comes out. This is a great article here on Android Authority from Camilla Wojciechowska Photos. This is the canceled Pixel Fold that wasn't good enough for Google, and you can already see an image there. We're going to dig into some pictures very, very closely here in just a little while, but you guys are, I'm sure, quite familiar with the fact that the Pixel Fold was leaked and rumored for years. For a very, very long time, and it only just came out about a year ago. And this is a great timeline, a great sort of explanation for why that is. Google was working on the Pixel Fold all that time, all those years. It just didn't actually have a final design, and it wasn't actually good enough to release until about a year ago. So before I go any further, I do want to say, link in the description to this article. Definitely go click it. You can go look at the images yourself directly there, and there's a lot of good stuff in this article. But basically what we're dealing with is a post on XDA. Someone posted these photos asking if this was a Pixel Fold. A local seller has it for sale, but it looked weird to them. It has the original Tensor processor, and it's just a strange looking device. Now, those original images are apparently gone, but luckily, we have Android Authority to thank for this. They saved the images, so we can actually take a look at them ourselves. We're going to open up this first one so that we can zoom in on it, and immediately, a lot of things are probably going to stand out to you. First off, the weird carbon fiber look up top is interesting, but this kind of weird design pattern on the back and the lack of a Google logo is actually kind of what you'd expect out of a Pixel prototype. We have seen other Pixel prototypes have this exact sort of thing going on. It sold kind of lets you know this is a Pixel phone, but it's definitely not a Pixel phone that is ready for release. Another thing that you might notice is that the camera bar is totally different. This is the final camera bar on the Pixel Fold, and what you can see there is much more reminiscent, there we go, there's some light, of the Pixel 6 or Pixel 6 Pro, and that is because this device, this prototype, comes from the Pixel 6 era. It was going to run, and it did run, the original Tensor chip, not the G2 that we eventually did get. Now, we do have other images to look at. Unfortunately, they are of very low quality, very low resolution, so we're going to have to just kind of take them for what they are. We're not going to be able to see a whole lot. You can see that inner foldable screen there. I don't know if that's a shadow or what, but I swear that backside looks thicker than the other side. It's probably just a shadow. Not a whole lot of information you can glean from that. I wish that I could see how much of a bezel there is up there at the top. Is that a bezel that we're seeing? Is that a camera right there that we are seeing? Very, very difficult to tell for sure. As for the cover display, that does look fairly similar. I would say that the bezels are even kind of generally the same size as well. Not a whole lot of change there. That's actually really, really close to the final design of this device. Looking at the back side here, again, that hinge also does look remarkably similar to the hinge that we ended up getting. So I think a lot of the hardware ended up staying the same. The internals and the camera hardware, those were going to change. We'll talk about that a bit more, but a lot of this stuff looks very similar. Then we have one more look at the cover display with a Mario icon on there, which is kind of interesting. This just looks like a regular sort of Pixel-esque launcher that is dated back to that era. I did mention that I was going to be talking about those specs, and luckily Camilla put together this amazing table that will help break all of this down. Again, I want to heavily encourage you, go click the link in the description, go to this article, look at the images yourself, go give them a click, a hit for this reporting. Please don't just watch my video and then move on. Here we have the information though. So here's the Pipit codename device that we were talking about. And as you can see, it had the same camera setup basically as the Pixel 6a, the same primary, the same ultra wide. Now notice they don't actually have a telephoto listed here, but the selfie for the outer is the same, selfie for the inner is the same as the outer. So this was basically a Pixel 6a camera setup slapped onto a foldable chassis. What we eventually got was a little bit of a step up, right? It is a much better primary sensor. It's the 787, actually the same sensor that is in the Pixel 7a, but it's cropped down to 48 megapixels. Same ultra wide that they've been using for a little while. And then we have that 3J1 for the telephoto. I think it's safe to say that this thing would have had a far worse camera than what we got. I'm sure it would have been fine for most things, but like no 5x optical zoom, no 48 megapixel primary, man, that would have been a pretty big step down. One interesting thing that I think is definitely worth thinking about here is let's compare what we were almost going to get with the Pixel 6 Pro that was going to be kind of right in that same time frame. For the Pixel Fold, which was likely going to still be very expensive, who knows, maybe they had sort of cut down specs with regard to the cameras because they were going to deliver it at a cheaper price point. It's hard to say. But when we look at these specs and we think about the 6 Pro versus what that Pixel Fold was going to be, this camera setup absolutely trashes what that Pixel Fold was going to be. The primary is a much better, much higher resolution, much larger sensor. The telephoto didn't exist. You at least had a 4x optical on that device, and then I believe the ultra wide is probably fairly similar. It might not be the same sensor, it might be a better sensor. At the end of the day, this was a far superior camera setup. And look, don't get me wrong, the Pixel Fold versus the Pixel 7 Pro. The 7 Pro has the better camera setup, but it's not the same like orders of magnitude that we were going to have with this Pipit device versus the 6 Pro. So that is something to consider when you're sort of thinking about why was this device not released. You really have, let's just simplify things and say you have two options, two possible explanations. One, the hardware wasn't up to snuff. Two, the software wasn't up to snuff. So with regard to that hardware, maybe they just weren't satisfied with what they were putting together and the price they were going to need to sell it at. Maybe they weren't satisfied with the Tensor G1. The Pixel 6 had a lot of problems when it first came out. I know a lot of people hate the Tensor devices, Tensor processor, but the G1 was in pretty rough shape. The G2 was significantly better. The G3's been more stable and better. Hopefully that continues and continues. But going back to that G1, it was a little bit rough, and the software along with it was a little bit rough as well. And in particular, if you're going to start thinking about a large screen device, yes, we had, I think, Android 12L right around that time. But let's be honest, guys, the Pixel Fold launched without the ability to force apps to resize themselves to take up the full screen. And that was what we got. Where was this device's software going to be at? I think it's fair to assume it was pretty far behind what we actually ended up getting. And that is something that I think is also a little bit concerning and could potentially explain why this device was held until they had the device we eventually got. So guys, I think this is just a really interesting sort of like peek behind the curtain at how this sort of thing works over at Google. We can speculate about a lot of this stuff and we will never know exactly which explanation is correct. Probably a combination of a whole bunch of things, but it's a lot of fun to speculate, and I must admit that seeing images like this do make me happy. I think this is really, really cool, getting to see stuff like this that otherwise we would simply never have the opportunity to see. I do want to, for the final time, encourage you to click the link in the description, and I actually intentionally left out one little tidbit that might draw you over there, and it has to do with stylus input. So if you want to hear about that, go click that link, guys. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more content just like this, and until next time, stay nerdy, my friends.